So I guess tell me a little bit about why you're doing this current tour and what you're expecting with people taking away from it in terms of what you want to cover. I know you're obviously covering the dead, but why bring it out on the road like this?
Sure. So, all right, just real quick, I'm assuming you're recording and we're good to go?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So I put out a new book in the fall of 2019,
Yep.
October of 2019, called Jerry Garcia's Secret Space of Dreams. And that book, I basically, instead of just doing regular book signings where I show up and meet and greet people and say hi and sign books, I put together this 90-minute slideshow storytelling presentation that is about my experience photographing the Grateful Dead over the last 42 years. And so I've been doing this presentation for the last couple of years. It's evolved over time. I first started doing it actually 5 years ago when I put out a book called Hippie Chick, A Tale of Love, Devotion, and Surrender. And then about 3 years ago, I was doing a little music festival in Colorado with leftover salmon, and they asked me if I wanted to do a Grateful Dead slideshow, and I was like, sure. So I put it together at that point, and it was, 35 or 40 minutes long. And since then, it's sort of evolved into this whole big story about me photographing this band and how I started when I was a kid. And I would find photos, and I'd be like, oh, this is a cool story. Oh, wait, I should add this story. Oh, this is cool. I've never told that story. And I have all the photos to go with it.
Yeah.
So, even though it's a very put-together presentation, there is no script. Right,
Yeah.
The script are the photographs, and as I'm going through the photographs, I'm just telling the stories that go along with the photographs. And so, it is the same story because these are the things that happened. And when I do the longer version, so I have an hour long version, I have a 90-minute version. In Asheville, I'm going to do the 90-minute version. And when I do that version, I add in some other stories on like Primus and Dr. Dre and Neil Young and Robert Plant and stuff like that. So when I have a little bit more time, like I'm doing this, I'm doing it in Virginia, in Norfolk, Virginia, Asheville, North Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, and Miami, Florida on this little run. I'm doing 4 dates. And every one of them will be a slightly different one. Actually, Norfolk and Asheville will be the same because I'll do the full 90 minutes.
Okay.
And then Charleston and Miami will be the shorter version at about an hour 10 minutes.
So as you were saying, sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Well, has this been like a really cathartic experience as you've gone through this?
I think that for me, the catharticness of it all happened when I first started doing it, right? Because I've done it now, 20, 30, 40 times. I've kind of worked through all of those things. I mean, there are small little epiphanies that I have here and there. A number of years ago when I was a young lad, when I was 19 years old, I got arrested with a large quantity of LSD, and I went to prison.
Yeah.
And I tell that story in detail. And at first when I started telling it, it was just sort of this experience of talking about my experience. And then when I started talking to people about it outside of my presentation, and I posted something on social media about it, people sort of reminded me that I was very lucky that when I got arrested, it was just a few years before these mandatory minimums took place, because there were people that got arrested with less drugs than I got arrested with a few years after me and spent 15, 20 years in jail. And if that had happened to me, I would have never created this body of work that I've created, and I would have never become me. I would have never become the person that I am today. And it kind of shook me to the core a little bit, right? So, there are some moments like that I've come across since creating this. And every time I tell the story, it's slightly different. Not because the story changes, but just how much information I give. Sometimes I might tell a story about a particular photo shoot that goes on for 2 minutes, and sometimes I might tell it for 8 minutes, and it's just me talking about more of the details, and it just depends on the vibe of the audience and how I'm feeling and the feel of the room and stuff like that. So it's all the same story, but, sometimes I feel like being rushed through things, and sometimes I'm feeling like very chatty and just really opening up a little bit more and going deeper. So that's kind of how that works.
Well, it's almost like a live show. Like you don't know what to expect.
It is a live show, and there is a little bit of improvisation in it, because that's what we do as we go to jam band shows where there's lots of improvisation. But yes, there definitely is improvisation. It also depends on sometimes when I'm in a room and there's people that I was on Dead Tour with, 40 years ago, that are in that room with me, and I get to a photo of them, and I might riff on that and about them for 5 minutes, right? Because, and I've done that a lot. I've had different people come. I just did this in Santa Cruz back in November, and there was a room full of people that I was on tour with, including an ex-girlfriend of mine who went to a lot of shows with. And she was in a lot of photos, and we talked about, and she's important to my slideshow and important to my life. And, so we talked a little bit more about, or I talked a little bit more about those experiences with her, just because she was there and it was just made sense, So yes, it absolutely is a live performance that is slightly different every time.
Well, and you also circle back to why all of us are so attracted to live music, and especially with the Dead, yourself, myself included, as a photographer and a journalist, is that it's all about capturing these moments and this magic that you'll remember for the rest of your life, and you'll never forget it.
Absolutely. So, I noticed on your Facebook page you had talked about some shows you had coming up. I think you're going to get ready to go see Kiss, or maybe you already did that. And, so Kiss, they're going to play a tour of 20 dates or 40 dates or whatever it is on this tour. And probably every show and every set list will be exactly the same. Yeah. Right? And when we go see the Grateful Dead, or in this case, Dead & Co., or Phil and Friends, or even a band like Mo, or Umphreys, or Widespread, or Pigeons Playing Ping Pong, or any of these bands that are in the jam band world, no two shows will be exactly the same, right? So these people push those limits, those musicians push those limits, take these risks, in hopes of creating these more profound, magical moments. Now, I'm not saying you can't have a profound moment at a Kiss concert if you're a big fan and you're and you're our age, or you're 30 or 40 or 50 years old, and you're kind of reliving, your youth, and you're like, oh my God, this song brings back so many memories. The first time I had sex in the backseat of my car listening to, a Kiss song, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And everybody, and that's what live music does. It brings you to these places and these times in your life, right? If you're listening to the radio and a song comes on, it's happened to me numerous times. One example is I remember, hearing Hey Jude come on the radio by the Beatles, and it bringing me back to being in my mother's car, in 1970 or 71, and hearing it on AM radio in New York, driving down to the Jersey Shore, right? And, the hair stands up on the back of your neck, and you get goosebumps, and so music transports us to all these places, and these important, profound moments in our lives. Maybe we were there with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or somebody that's now a husband or a wife, or, you have this incredible experience with your best bros or your best sisters, or whatever it is, right? And my photographs, I want them to do the same thing. Take us back to those moments where the hair stands up on the back of your neck and you get goosebumps because you're like, holy shit, this was my experience also. I've never been able to put it into words, but now I've got Jay Blakesberg talking about this thing that we all did together and showing these photographs, and it brings me right back to that moment when I was 20 or 25 or 30 or 35 or whatever it was, and I was having this experience that is now this experience that has brought me to who I am in my life today.
Yeah. Well, when you look back to that, I think it was the Meadowland 78, when you look back to that first show that you were photographing, was that your first show in general for the Dead?
No, I saw them a year earlier at Englishtown in Labor Day weekend, 77.
Okay.
I was 15 years old. And I actually saw the Jerry Garcia Band 2 months before that in the summer of 77 in Asbury Park, New Jersey. So I had a little tiny bit of Grateful Dead experience under my belt before the Meadowlands, but not a lot.
Well, when you think about those early shows, when you look back at that initial entrance into that band and that scene, what was the thing that sticks out the most when you think back on it?
Well, I think that for me, there's a couple of different things. So by the time we got to, I want to say probably by the time we left the Meadowlands, we started listening to a lot more Grateful Dead at home. There was a lot of tapes out there, right?
Yeah.
There was a lot of tape trading. So there was two things, right? You're listening to this music more and more, and you're getting into it more and more. And every time you go to a show, you're meeting other like-minded people to yourself, right? You're meeting, as Bob Weir once called us, they were misfits playing for misfits, right?
Yeah.
And so, all of a sudden we're in a parking lot of a Dead show, and you go there with your buddy from high school, and you're 17 years old, and you know nobody. But when you leave, 20 new people.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you started conversations, or you were walking around a parking lot and you looked at a T-shirt and the guy said, "Hey, I've got a tape of last night's show at the Spectrum in Philly. If you send me your address and a Maxell tape or $2.50 for the cost of a tape, I'll mail you a copy of that show." And you're like, wow, cool. And all of a sudden you're pen pals with this guy or this gal. And then you go to another show and you see that same person and he's got 3 new people with him from his hometown. And all of a sudden you're just part of this network of people that are like you, right? And then you go home and you listen to more music and you're by yourself and you're in your parents' living room and you drop a cassette in of, the Dead at wherever in 1969, and you find yourself dancing by yourself for yourself in a living room while you're listening to a cassette of the Grateful Dead when you're 17 years old, right? And at that point that something this has affected you enough that it's becoming life changing, and you're not really quite sure how or why. But it's coming. The zeitgeist is right around the corner, and you've tapped into the magic.
Yeah.
And now you're just waiting for it to just grab you and take you for that wild ride that we always were hoping that we would find.
Well, that's the thing is
when we found that magic.
For me as a journalist, the Dead was the reason I ended up on this trajectory.
Yeah, because you were having these experiences.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, how do I express myself? I want to express myself creatively, and you started writing about it, right? Which is an incredible creative thing to do, And it's, and I'm sure you've written, just like I've taken, quickie, shitty photos, you've written, quickie, 3-sentence reviews.
Oh, I know that stuff.
But you've also gone in depth and really thought about this in really deep ways that your words resonate with other people and take them back to that moment and that space and that time.
Yeah. Well, in terms of creative mediums, why photography? Why is that the medium that you can express yourself most accurately, passionately, and artistically?
Well, it's just what I chose to do. It's just, it chose me, I guess, right? I mean, when I first started taking pictures, I really liked it. It really turned me on. It made me feel good. It made me connected. It gave me a purpose. It gave me something to do. It gave me... it connected me to a scene. It connected me to a experience. It was, for me, it was the first form of social media. I'd go in my basement, I'd make 8x10 black and white prints, and I'd give them to my friends, and they would put them on their bedroom walls with thumbtacks, and it connected us, right? We had these experiences, and we had these photographs to remember those experiences. And as time went on, it became more important for me to document these experiences. And at a certain point, I realized that I was documenting a really important segment of pop culture history, and really was a visual anthropologist, and that I should keep doing this because it was good for everybody, and I was actually making some money doing it.
Yeah.
And eventually I turned it into a career and a profession that here I am now, traveling around the country talking about my experience and showing, 350 photographs